Thank you for joining us at Farm Science Review 2011 this year. I think this is Ohio's biggest and best toy show. We do like to add a little bit of education along with it, though. This morning, I'm really pleased to be able to moderate this discussion. I want to be clear on moderating. I know pretty much everything I've learned about this topic. I've learned from preparing for it with these three gentlemen that are here with me. On my far right is Doug Southgate. He's a professor in the Department of Agricultural, Environmental Development, Economics, also at Ohio State, one of my colleagues. Alan Kleiber, in the middle, is an assistant professor. He's just joined us, I think, officially. Are you with us or not? Okay, a matter of weeks, right? Yes, just a matter of weeks. He's joined us from Penn State University, so he's taken a big step up in the world. And then
I still need some more scarlet gray.
Yes, he does. He does. We're going to forgive him this year. He's still kind of probationary. And then Mike Lloyd, extension educator from Noble County, who's done a lot of work with Utica and shale gas in the state of Ohio, done a lot of education on it, knows a lot more about what it's like on the ground. What I want to start with is each of our three panelists. They're coming at this from a different angle. We're just going to start with about 5 to 8 minutes of background on their areas of expertise on shale and Utica gas, or on shale gas in the state. And then we'll kind of continue the discussion. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to let us know. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Doug Southgate, professor in AEDE.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Matt. And I appreciate the water because, as you can hear from my voice, I'm going to need it fairly soon. But what I would like to do is just provide you some general background information about this industry that's new to Ohio. It's a little bit older in some neighboring states, most notably Pennsylvania. And we really have an advantage here of having Alan recently up Penn State able to discuss the past few years' development of shale resources in our state, not the state, the Commonwealth territories. Really, the story begins millions upon millions of years ago when this part of the world, other parts of the country really were covered by oceans. And shales, or basically you can think of shale as ancient ocean beds. Over many years, of course, and millions of years, microorganisms died, fell to the bottom of the ocean, decayed, fossilized, and so forth. Those are the hydrocarbons. I think it's appropriate, or it's helpful for me, as a non-geologist and non-specialist in this area, to think of shales as like the mother lode of hydrocarbons. The rich source of hydrocarbons that, up until very recently, weren't exploited. The shales are very deep, 6, 8, 10,000 feet below the surface of the ground. Moreover, not only are these shales deep, most of them are impermeable. They're extraordinarily hard. As I heard one person from the industry express it, the only thing that's harder down in the ground until you get to granite, the only thing that's more hard, less permeable than the shale are the drill bits, the drills that we set down there. It's safe to say that this shale it never was developed, even though it is the source of most of our hydrocarbons. Up until 10, 15 years ago, we got virtually no natural gas, no oil, no hydrocarbons from these shale deposits. Instead, the industry tapped into other sorts of formations, geological strata, such as limestone, some sandstones. These are geological formations toward which, over geologic time, the hydrocarbons have migrated. So these other stratas, again, the limestone, some sandstones, are close to the surface, and they were more accessible, easier to work. In terms of public policy, I think it's safe to say that shale would remain unexploited to this day were it not for an important piece of deregulation from a little more than 30 years ago. the U.S. Natural Gas Policy Act of 1978 had various effects on the natural gas market. Well, in some ways it created the natural gas market. But one of the major effects was to guarantee access to the interstate pipeline system to producers and their willing customers. They had access to that pipeline system at a fee, and fees regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. But that step, along with some others that were spelled out in this piece of legislation from 1978, unleashed a lot of exploratory activity. Gas companies started to go after less promising causes. They suddenly had an incentive to do so. And furthermore, there was tremendous technological innovation that was set in motion, it's fair to say, by the U.S. Natural Gas Policy Act of 1978. Technology for exploiting the shale, again, previously out of reach in economic terms. The technology took various forms. One area of technological innovation was in so-called directional or horizontal drilling. This is what I'm sure everyone in this room has seen the American Petroleum Institute ads, the Exxon Mobil ads, and so forth, that shows wells being bored thousands of feet down below the surface, well below aquifers and so forth. And then the drill gets followed by the piping, go off horizontal. They're able to do this a mile or more from the vertical boring these days. There was directional drilling before. It has improved remarkably. The same goes for hydraulic fracturing or fracking. This is the process of injecting fluids, mainly water, but also some sand, and also some chemicals that keep the sand suspended in the water. This hydraulic fracking fluid is injected at very high pressure into this hydrocarbon-bearing rock, the shale, and that's what forces out the hydrocarbons. And then, for me, frankly, the most jaw-dropping area of technological innovation has been in the exploration side. There is so-called microseismic technology that, as the CEO of one of the companies that has developed this technology expressed it a few months ago. This technology can pick up the vibrations set off when a full can of Coke is dropped on a solid concrete floor 10,000 feet below the surface of the ground. This allows the industry to pinpoint, identify deposits in ways that just weren't possible before. Formerly, oil and gas exploration involved actually boring holes deep into the ground, dropping charges, cupping your ears, so to speak, and listening. That's Stone Age, fossil age stuff these days. As you can imagine, with that old technology, there were a lot of dry holes drilled. These days, only 1.5% of the perforations by these drilling companies are dry holes. One major company hits gas, oil, 98.5% of the time it drills. So again, there have been tremendous technological innovations that have allowed shale to be developed. This shale development is a total game changer. I was just reviewing some literature last night for a report I'm writing. Am I running out of time? You know when an economist says something's going to be short and clear, he or she's lying at least once. I was reviewing some literature from the time of the Natural Gas Policy Act, a Harvard Business School report on energy, and I looked at the chapter on natural gas. It was pretty discouraging. A lot of this chapter was about the legislation, but the authors of this chapter from Harvard Business School said, well, we really don't expect any change from the long-term trend toward mounting resource scarcity, mounting gas scarcity, rising prices, etc. So that was the prevailing view 30 years ago. It was the prevailing view as recently as 2004, when the Federal Reserve Chairman at the time, Alan Greenspan, went before Congress and said, look, we're running out of gas. We need to build import terminals for liquefied natural gas, LNG, just as quickly as we can, so that we can substitute imports for our declining domestic output. Nobody's talking about that anymore. Instead, the general trend has been for continued declines in production from the conventional sources. The ones I told you about, for limestones and sandstones, generally more permeable, generally closer to surfaces. Indeed, both onshore and offshore, those gas supplies have continued to decline. However, the increases in natural gas output from the shale, and it really only began about 10 years ago in North Texas, in the so-called Barnett Play or formation. That's when serious commercial production of gas from shale began. Since then, the increases in gas production from shale have greatly exceeded the declines from conventional sources, and the net effect for gas supplies as a whole in this country have been nothing short of remarkable. The net effect has been positive. Our natural gas supplies are going up. They show no signs of stopping to go up. So natural gas is becoming plentiful. We know this from the price evidence. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, again, the time of the Natural Gas Policy Act, the ratio of the price of oil to the price of natural gas was on the order of 15, 17 to 1. Then there was a decline, but recently with increases in oil prices and declines in gas prices, that ratio is up again to 15, 17 to 1. So natural gas is cheap because of this development. This creates various sorts of opportunities. I'll just mention a couple to bring it to Ohio, and then I guess I'm going to pass the microphone off to Mike and talk about recent Ohio developments. As you can imagine, put yourself in the position of a natural gas producer. For example, Chesapeake. I had the pleasure of visiting the headquarters of Chesapeake Energy about a month ago, and this event was a University Partners Day. The highlight of that event was a so-called town hall, where the senior vice president of production for Chesapeake talked about these changes in the industry. He talked about the consequences for that company. That company, Chesapeake, as many of you know, is the leading producer of natural gas, not just in this country, but also in the Utica and Marcellus deposits and so forth. Well, with the price of your main product, and the company is very specialized in gas production, with the price going down, this company is looking to do different sorts of things. It's looking to export gas, perhaps. And by the way, as gas has become cheaper and more available in this country, this has had worldwide implications. The LNG, liquefied natural gas, that we were going to import through all those new import terminals, is instead going to Europe. Europe is less dependent on natural gas. Specifically, it's less dependent on Russia. So the stranglehold that Russia seemed to be acquiring on energy supplies in Western Europe has been loosened. We no longer hear, for example, of a new gas OPEC. I don't need to tell you what OPEC stands for. There were worries that a gas OPEC would be established, led by all countries, Russia and Iran. I don't think anyone in this room wants that. Anyway, that's what your 2 more minutes. I said this would be short and clear.
The gentleman yields 2 minutes.
Or I'll buy 2 minutes. We already promised. So getting back to Chesapeake, at this town hall meeting, again led by the senior vice president for production for Chesapeake, he said the main thing that the company is looking to do, understandably enough, is to produce different sorts of things other than methane and natural gas that we burn in our homes and so forth. And they were looking at shale deposits that are rich in oil, that are rich in so-called natural gas liquids, ethane that's converted into ethylene, and basically building blocks for our chemical industry, polymer industry, and so forth. He identified 2 deposits that the company is particularly interested in. One is the Bakken-Williston Basin Formation in western North Dakota, extends into South Dakota and Montana. The other is the Utica, or Utica Point Pleasant, which is right here. Now, some of you with better geological knowledge than I have on your standard might know that the Utica starts up in Western Ontario, goes up the Lake Erie, extends through Ohio, into Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and so forth. But it was interesting the way that this Chesapeake executive drew the Utica on his map of promising deposits. And he basically drew what you see here on the map. He showed the Uticas in the eastern half, maybe more like the eastern one-third of Ohio. This is a deposit that is weak, that contains a lot of oil and a lot of natural gas liquids. As it is developed, there's going to be more local oil supplies, but also among the consequences is a revival of the chemical industry in this state. Shell is talking about putting in a major cracking plant as a plant that separates natural gas into its different parts. And
Just to clarify, the map there is actually, that's an ODNR map. I know it's a little hard to read right there, but that is an Ohio Department of Natural Resources map that's available on their website, so you can actually see the county's names a little better, see how that extends to the state a little better. I realize that the screen is not perfect, the room makes the lighting a little bit hard to see that, or if you'd like afterwards, you're welcome to come up and take a look. I want to turn it over to Mike. He's seen a lot of this development on the ground and can talk a little more about that, to talk about what this looks like at the local level. We've heard a lot about the national, international. What's this mean if you are a landowner, if this development is actually coming to your county or to your township?
Good morning. I'm Mike Boyd, assistant professor, and I spent all of my career in the eastern part of Ohio, mainly in Noble and Monroe counties. Excuse the pun, but a couple years ago it became obvious that we were going to see development in Ohio in oil and gas, and the oil and gas business in Ohio is exploding. There's the pun. What we've seen, living on the eastern border of the state, I get a lot of my personal media out of West Virginia and Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh stations and so forth. So it was obvious that something was happening east of us. And when you look at the maps, such as the one up on the projector, Ohio plays a major role in that. The focus in Ohio, or the activity in Ohio, probably began plus or minus 2 years ago, when for the first time in many years we had people coming around asking folks about, do you own your mineral rights and would you be interested in selling them? And many people in most go on a neighbor and only come under you with the bits. Now the horizontal drilling is in existence. Issues with water, issues with location. Personally, I'm on a county park district. We were approached to release our parks, so you get into public issues. So we've spent the last year or more in the region dealing with individuals who were interested in leasing, something that appeared fairly early in the game also, and has been a game changer to some degree, has been the landowner groups. Initially, the companies were talking to individuals. So individuals got together and formed groups. Those groups can control large parcels of acreage, 20, 30, 50,000 acres, which make them very attractive to the different companies out there interested in leasing. So they can then lease on terms that may or may not be better than individual terms. Earlier this week, I guess yesterday and Thursday and Friday of last week, leases were being signed for a landowner group in eastern Belmont County. The media report is that what was those original $25 leases. Well, these leases were going for $4,950, and the royalties, which traditionally started at 12%, the royalties on these were 19%. Well, 19%, they're asking me, I don't know if it's 19% gross of the oil and gas produced or if it's net after expenses. That I don't know because I wasn't reading those leases.
It's net.
It's net, okay. you know, there are people in the audience that probably know more on many of these topics than some of us do because they're living through it. But like other landowner groups are continuing to form in the region. What was originally a Marcellus play when this started several years ago has certainly developed in Ohio. The Marcellus, as once again you can see from the map, it is pretty well limited to the eastern sliver of the state. Most of Ohio's play will be a Marcellus, or will be a Utica play, not a Marcellus play. But Extension's role has been to try to educate landowners. We have also, in addition to releasing, we have had meetings where we brought in water specialists from West Virginia University because the hydraulic fracturing issue has been at the forefront of some people's view of this. So we wanted to do that. We, next month, will be doing our first workshops on, okay, now this royalty check is coming, we now have money, so how do you best use that money? You know, don't forget to pay your taxes, you will owe taxes on them. Don't go out and spend it all on other things beforehand. But, you know, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for philanthropy in a region of the state that's never seen much philanthropy. So we will continue to do educational efforts as the whole project continues to develop. I can see our focus changing from releasing to dealing with the potential environmental aspects. We've had we've actually now had 2 meetings where we've brought local political leaders in, county commissioners, engineers, auditors, to talk about the infrastructure needs and how it's going to place changes and place new demands on counties, townships, and so forth. If you're from this region of the state and have never had the opportunity to come to southeastern Ohio, it's not quite as flat down there as it is here. And our roads tend to be gravel in many cases. So we got some real issues in the size of this equipment that will be coming in to do the drilling. So that's basically what Extension's role has been. It will continue to develop, and I'll be happy to field questions at the end.
Thank you. My name is Alan Taylor, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Agriculture, Environmental Development, and Economics at Ohio State. As was mentioned at the beginning, I've spent the last couple of years as an assistant professor at Penn State, so I've been sort of in the middle of the Marcellus and the exploration that's boomed there. So I want to share just a little bit about where we are somewhat in the environmental side, because we hear an awful lot about that on the news, and then also talk about some of the local economic and job impacts that we've seen there that are likely to come to Ohio as well. So on the environmental side, one of the biggest things that you hear about is the impact on water quality. So to go back to what Doug said, these wells, you go down between a mile and 2 miles deep, and then you turn a little bit and you go a mile out horizontally. The rock, as he said, is extremely tight. It's an extremely hard rock. In order to get the oils and the natural gas to come back out of that rock, they have to use a process called hydraulic fracking. For each one of these wells, this mile down, mile out wells, it takes between 2.5 million and 8 million gallons of water that's under high pressure in order to break the rock apart. That water has to be, typically it's trucked into a holding tank nearby where the activity is going, and then it's pumped into the well for a period of about 1 week. Following that, you have to, and while it's going in, you have to add salts, you have to add various other chemicals, there's approximately 100 chemicals, as well as sands. The sands are important because the sands actually help keep the rock apart once you frack the rock. Over the next month or so, after you've used this 2.5 million to 8 million gallons of water on that well, between 10 and 40% of that water will come to the surface, which is something called flowback. This flowback will have salts, it will have chemicals, and it will have high levels of polar dissolved solids. So you have to collect this water. You can't just let this flowback water come back to the surface and go into local streams. That's where a lot of the issues happen. So first thing to think about is where do we get the water? In Pennsylvania, originally companies were actually purchasing the water from treatment facilities. That became very expensive, so they then had worked with local river basin commissions and the equivalent of the ODR in order to get permitting to withdraw water from local streams and rivers. We're fortunately in an area that most of these streams can handle that withdrawal, but originally at the very beginning, this was a little bit concerned about taking too much water from some streams that just couldn't handle
that's sort of been solved at this point. The bigger issue is the flowback water. So one of the big pushes you hear about in the industry is reuse and recycling. As of the last 6 months of 2010, about 15% of this water that has flowed, that has come back to the surface, has been remixed on site and used for another well without having to be removed from the site. About another 50% of that water, so we're getting up to about 70%, and that's the number you'll hear talk about in the industry, about another 50% of that water is actually put back into trucks, and it's trucked to industrial facilities that remove the salts and the brines and the other contaminants from the water. They then take the clean water from the industrial facility and they truck it back to the well sites and they reuse that treated water. So it has been treated, but it's not been released. It's actually that treated water has been back and reused. And that's where you get to about the 70% number. So there's an incredible amount of technological innovation that's been working on that. As you reuse water multiple times, it gets harder and harder to add enough fresh water to sort of dilute the brines and the salts in it so that it's suitable for fracking. So eventually, disposal is necessary. This has spawned a lot of new industry that is able to treat this. Pennsylvania found out quickly that letting your municipal treatment plants treat this water was not a very good idea. It actually ended up messing up the biological, the bacteria in some of the treatment facilities. And so as of May of this year, they've actually asked, and with some enforcement behind that, the treatment facilities no longer take fracked water, and the treatment facilities have stopped doing that. To handle that extra volume that used to be treated locally, Ohio has played a pertinent role because Ohio's geology is very suitable for underground injection wells. So these wells are drilled deep underground underneath the hard layer of rock so that the water can't permeate back up to the surface. And they're certified in Ohio by actually the ODR and the EPA. And they inject this water underground, and so it's below any of the levels, we're talking miles deep here, that it's not going to return back to the surface. And so there's no treatment that's involved with that. It just gets injected. There's some risk of spills. We've seen a few instances of that in Pennsylvania. They have not been large so far. Most of the land that this is occurring on, the well pads are about 8 acres. So when you think about if you're a local landowner and what happens to your land if you decide to lease, about an 8-acre area will be essentially flattened. Typically this is forest land. It could be ag land. About 8% I believe is forest. And this 8-acre, they bring in diesel generators, they bring in the rigs, and they begin to drill for wells, and they also put in a holding tank that's lined.
Just very quickly, keep talking. I'm going to try and throw a few photographs that Mike provided of some various sites. I had never seen what these look like, so I'm going to have Alan continue to talk. I'll just sort of slowly cycle through for those who want.
Great, thank you. So you've got these sites, you can drill wells, so you've got to get this holding tank that'll hold the water. From each well pad, each one of these 8-acre approximately pads, they put in between 6 and 10 individual wells. So because we're now drilling wells in different directions, once you go down and you go in one direction, you can put another well right next to it and go in a different direction. And so you get about 6 to 10 different wells on each one of these sites, and each one of these requires a 2.5 to 8 million gallons of water in terms of fracking. So that's where a lot of the environmental concern is. What do we do with this contaminated water when it comes back up? How fast can the industry improve in order to reuse that water? And what new industries are going to be spawned due to the needs to treat that water? So turning gears a little bit now to some of the local impacts that we've seen in Pennsylvania or likely to come to Ohio, one of the first questions on everybody's mind is what about jobs? And it is true that there are an increase in jobs where this activity occurs. It is not true that most of those jobs occur in the oil and gas industry itself. The oil and gas industry typically keeps 14-day on, 14-day off, 14 hours a day while you're on, hours. They found that, at least in Pennsylvania, it's very hard to get the local people to accept those hours and those working conditions. And so it's much easier to bring in people from other areas around the country that are more used to that type of work schedule. Where the jobs are being created is because they're bringing in people from out of state. You have tremendous need for hotel capacity, for restaurants, for service type jobs in these areas. And so hotels are absolutely booked to capacity. It's very difficult in any of these areas to find hotel rooms. These people that are living there in hotel rooms, they're spending their incomes, they're spending their monies. So local governments, local businesses are seeing increases in revenue. It's not clear that that's going to be a long-term increase, however. Once the oil and gas industry, once this boom period has passed, these people don't live in Pennsylvania. They're going to take a lot of that money and they're going to go back home. And so you won't see this forever. This is a short-term thing, and most of the local policymakers and planners are aware of that. And one of the big questions at extension meetings that always comes up is how do we prepare for the future? We don't want this to be another boom and bust like we had in the past. And so that's a difficult question. One of the things that they're facing on the expense side is these people often bring families with them, they bring children, so there's increased enrollment in school. A lot of it is transitory enrollment in school. So areas that don't have money for the teachers, they're facing questions such as whether or not they should spend local government money in order to expand the teaching roles, with an uncertain future about what enrollment's going to be. You've also got the biggest complaint that you hear from residents is what about truck traffic? The truck traffic in order to get the salts and the sands and things like that, the chemicals, as well as the water itself to the oil and gas pads is tremendous. Any route we drive in these areas, interstates are just completely full of semi-trucks going back and forth. They go through local towns. And so another debate that you hear a lot of times is, well, maybe we should improve our infrastructure so that these trucks don't go through our areas. One of the counter arguments to that is that if we improve our infrastructure so trucks no longer have to go through our cities, will anybody ever come through our cities again once this activity is left? If you build a nice bypass, maybe you won't get that stop by person who used to come in and shop on Main Street. And so there are real world concerns in terms of the policy makers.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Let's open this up now. I'm going to spin this back. Do we have any questions from the audience for any of the three here? Yes, sir.
What percent of the gas and oil do you think they can get out of that beautiful area that's there? And then,
the question is, what percentage of the gas and oil do they think they can get out of that Utica layer?
I'm an economist, not a geologist. About the only, this is not an answer to your question, although the production from a single well falls off quickly. So one thing to understand about this sort of drilling is that it's almost more like an industrial process for a few years at least, where a well will be drilled horizontally and there will be some production, but then in fairly short order it will be replaced by another one. I will tell you that the estimates of overall resources in the Utica here, about no more than 2 weeks after this town hall meeting at Chesapeake headquarters that I mentioned, during which the executive was a little bit cautious about making predictions for the future. Within 2 weeks, Chesapeake was announcing that underlying the 1.5 million or so acres that the company has leased here in Ohio, it had discovered about $20 billion worth of resources. So gas, oil, and gas. So all I can do is tell you that it's sizable, it's worth a lot, but I can't provide you a geologic answer to your question, so I apologize.
Other questions? Yes,
Yeah, can you talk about the procedures that are taken to protect the domestic water strata, and also the duration of an operation, how many years, months, intense activity may occur?
So the question was, can we talk about some of the protections for the water supply in the area for people with living wells, and also what the length of time that we would experience the disruption, the industrial activity associated with the oil and gas drilling. The first thing to realize is that if everything goes right, there should be no problems. However, that doesn't, things go wrong, there's certainly the potential for problems. So when the wells are drilled, most of the local water supplies come between 200 and 300 feet deep. And so the biggest concern that local landowners have is what happens when the oil and gas starts flowing back up the pipe. We need to make sure that when it comes back up the well, none of that seeps into that surface area 200 to 300 feet deep. So right now, the state-of-the-art technology is they put casings into the pipe. So these are thick metal casings. They typically extend anywhere from 500 feet onto 1,000 feet, if not deeper. And these casings, if installed correctly, prevent anything from being in concrete. And then they fill this with concrete. And so there are no cracks in that process. You prevent any of the oil and gas or any of the contaminants, the methane, from leaching out into the water supply. If there are problems with the casings, it's possible, and indeed likely, that some methane will migrate from the wells into the surrounding water supplies. There's a study recently done by Duke geologists who looked at this issue, and they found, in Pennsylvania at least, that there was an increase in methane associated with lots of drilling activity in the area. What was missing in Pennsylvania, which Ohio has the opportunity to correct, is Pennsylvania did not have any pre-oil and gas drilling data on methane in wells. So we find it after the fact, but we don't know if it was already there. So Chesapeake Energy, I know for one, actually before they will drill now, does testing of water. They won't drill unless they test it because they're worried about liability issues. A lot of landowners are sort of hesitant to get their water tested or to ask for that. They don't necessarily want to know what's in their well water. They're worried about disclosure of what they might find. And not oil related. They just don't want to know what the quality of their water is. So one of the things that I would advocate, that a lot of people are advocating, is to, if you are going to have leases of oil and gas, to get your water tested so that if there are problems down the road, you know whether or not the oil and gas are there.
Now, how far, so beyond your self-leasing, if you have neighbors leasing or others in your area, how far out would you, just rule of thumb or ideas, how far out, if your land located, would you want to go ahead and have your land tested, even if you were one of the lessees?
Well, as I understand, at least a mile, I understand that it's Chesapeake's policy that it will test all underground water for at least a mile out in every direction. Let me add that ODNR and OEPA have developed guidelines for testing of water. This is not simply a matter of getting an old milk jug, washing it out, and filling it with water. You have to maintain so-called chain of custody for your water samples. Samples have to be evaluated by a lab, etc. So there's a right way to test this, which among other things becomes important if a lawsuit is involved. So there are guidelines out there. The good news is that it doesn't cost any more than $100 to do the water testing right. So certainly someone, even if a company doesn't test the water, which again is not the case for major players in this industry, you've just received a great big royalty check. You ought to be able to pay for the water test.
Right. The other question.
The second part of the question.
Sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Real quick was, how long does this disruption happen? Typically what you'll see is, since they can drill out about a mile, they'll put one pad, and then they'll go about 2 miles out and put another pad. So once you're in the same area, you're going to have the truck traffic, things like that's going to be there for a very long time. You're looking anywhere, depending on how many wells and how many pads they put it in an area, I'd say a minimum of 8 to 12 months that they would actually be there working the land. But it could be much longer.
When you drill a well, there's got to be a lot of dirt and rock come out of it.
Yeah, so in addition to the water issue, so the question was, what happens to all the rock and stuff that comes out when you drill a well? So this stuff that comes out is called cuttings, and that's typically taken to local landfills. So local landfills are seeing a boom in production right now and in revenue as they take a lot of the cuttings and they put them in landfills. In addition to that goes into landfills, the treatment facilities that take this water that then get the brines and the salts out, they get a solid substance, a salty substance that's back out that has metals mixed in with all kinds of other things. That also gets taken to landfills. So landfills have to apply